Firstly, I'd like to explain to the chamber that my absence for the second reading division was simply unfortunate and not designed to give any further time to this debate, given my very clear stance on not supporting any further corporate tax cuts. But we find ourselves with an amendment that the Treasurer, Scott Morrison, claims was given to me last week. Let me make it very clear to this chamber I had not seen this amendment until it was emailed to my office at 12:09 p.m. today. This week has been a complete shambles, an embarrassment to every Australian. You've got the Liberals knifing each other, and Doug Cameron, Senator Cameron, I should say, was caught dancing down the corridors with his air tambourine singing "Oh Happy Days." The people are over it. They're tired of every single one of you urinating their money up against a brick wall. If they could bang your heads against the same wall, they would. Both of you, Labor and the Coalition. You've left the people in this country with a filthy hangover today. When I go shopping, people say, why can't the government help the farmers instead of these big corporate companies? They're right. The bulk of multinationals don't pay their fair share of tax in this country. People ask me, why do we send billions overseas in the form of foreign aid? Good question, isn't it? Especially when every single one of you drives past at least 6 homeless people sleeping near Outback Jacks on Northbourne Avenue here in Canberra. And let's not forget the 105,000 other homeless we have in this country. I've got cane farmers across Queensland who want a code of conduct. Nothing else. No money. Just surety for their industry that employs tens of thousands of Australian workers and pumps $2 billion worth of cash through this economy. Why aren't we looking after those people? Aren't these tax cuts about saving jobs? I'm tired of the people of this country sitting at their dining room table saying, "Did you hear what those clowns in Canberra did today?" They don't care about us. They're talking about us. Well, tonight I'm voting for the lion's share of people in Rockhampton. I'm voting for the bulk of mums and dads in Tamworth. I'm voting for the majority of people in Coal Point, Townsville, Ipswich, Toowoomba, Beerwah, Bowen, Kilcoy, and thousands of towns across my home state of Queensland and thousands more across the country. The majority of people don't want these tax cuts for businesses with turnover greater than $50 million. And you know why they don't want me to support these tax cuts? You refuse to fix the PRRT. Let me explain the PRRT. It's a tax that's imposed on the gas offshore in northwestern Australia. This is 15% plus. And over the period of time that we've had the PRRT, we've had companies like Chevron, ExxonMobil and Shell that have accumulated now $290 billion. Let me say that again, $290 billion in tax credits that they say they will not be paying tax in the country for a long time to come. Shame. We have had countries like that are making more money out of the ships that sail out with our gas on it, like Japan, with around about $3 billion in excise tax from our gas, and we don't even make that money. We actually made around about $800 million off our sales of approximately estimated around about $55 billion in this year. You refuse to collect billions in royalties from Commonwealth waters. And this is the gas and oil. Qatar has sales of actually money coming in that country of $26.6 billion, and we had $800 million. And you're worried about investment in this country? The multinationals won't come here unless we reduce the sales at corporate tax cuts? I don't think you've got it right. The whole fact is they will come here because they're not paying the right taxes in the first place. Why wouldn't they come here? You refuse to acknowledge tax systems different to every other country. You made a reference to America, dropping it to 21%. Yes, but the state taxes are between 2 and 12% on top of that. But you don't refer to their different tax systems. You can't compare apples with oranges. And every country has a different taxation system. And just because they actually drop their taxes doesn't mean that we do. And you say they're dropping it every year and other countries are going to drop it to 17%. Is this a race to the bottom? Who can give the lowest tax rates so that we don't lose the investment? What are we losing? If they're not going to pay taxes in this country, what are we actually losing? They're only more competitive for the Australian businesses here that are trying to struggle and do the right thing. America has cheaper wages. That's another thing as well. And not that I am definitely not advocating that we have cheaper wages in Australia. Also, free trade. And your free trade agreements, what have you done? You've signed away the workers. You talk about more jobs. In your free trade agreements, you've actually allowed for these multinational companies to bring in their own workers. You're destroying our own workforce. And also America has half-price energy. That's where your problem is. Reduce the cost of energy in Australia so industries and manufacturing can compete, instead of escalating prices. America has 325 million people in their domestic market, but more importantly, trading partners on their doorstep. There is a combined 450 million people in Canada and South America that can sell their products to. They've also applied tariffs to imports. Fancy that. I recall a younger version of myself calling for tariffs 20 years ago. These countries protect their homegrown industries. In Australia, we tie our companies up in red tape and flood our market with cheap junk. Suggestions on how to spend the money. Well, if we don't do this, you're going to end up with about $4 billion in the coffers. Well, what about long-term vision projects, infrastructure projects, roads and rail? What about dams, the Bradford Water Scheme, which would drought-proof our nation and help the poor farmers out there? They're on their knees. What about Watering Australia program to bring the water down from the Territory, the ORD scheme, so we water Australia? These are projects that would actually prosper our country and help those that are dearly in need. This country is not going to grow or move forward if we don't provide the water that we need. We have countries like Israel have put in a watering project that can water their country, but we can't do it. There's no vision in this country whatsoever for the future generations. Railway projects like the Carmichael Mine, duplication of the Sunshine Coast Railway through to Menambur. Why aren't we duplicating the Bruce Highway from Brisbane to Cairns for tourism and freight? Coal-fired power stations to produce the dispatchable energy that we need to reduce the power prices in this country. Hydro power like the Tully Mill stream. Why aren't we making these projects? Where's the debate on nuclear energy? Why don't we do that? I have respectfully listened to the government's arguments, and I do thank Senator Cormann for his good-natured negotiations. But I cannot support a shift in the threshold to increase further corporate tax cuts. You say carving out the 4 banks. Well, I question where are the other banks that they have to answer what they've done wrong to many people across this country with the damage and the heartache that they've caused. It's more than just for banks. My obligation is to the everyday people of this country and to ensure we start paying down the mounting debt. One Nation supported the $50 million turnover, up to the $50 million turnover. That's cost to the budget of $35 billion. We supported the personal tax cuts, another $144 billion. You want to pass these further corporate tax cuts, that's another further $45 billion, and you're talking about 8 years' time. How do we know the state of this economy in 8 years' time? How do we know if this country can afford it? How do we know who's going to be hold of the chequebook? Because I don't trust any one of you. I've seen it under Labor, changed over to the Coalition, it was in debt by about $270 billion. Now we're reaching nearly $600 billion. There has to be a debt ceiling put on because someone has to curtail your spending. No one's talking about the future generations, how we're paying down this debt. You talk about jobs, it's going to create jobs. Well, the only way you will create jobs in this country and get a better higher wage increase, and I tell you, if you want to, please work with your state counterparts and investigate reducing payroll tax, which is a bigger impost on business across the nation and it will stimulate jobs in this country. And that's why I say to you, corporate tax cuts will not, you can't guarantee they are actually going to create employment and give higher wages, because I tell you something, a lot of these business, what I hear all the time, the biggest problem in this whole country is payroll tax. I know it is not a federal issue, it is a state issue, and you have to work with the states to compensate them, slowly reduce the payroll tax, which will increase employment. Why would these businesses money into their companies and businesses through a corporate tax cut when they know that when you create more employment and higher wages, it is going to put them over the threshold and they're going to be paying more in payroll tax? That's where it needs to stop. Address your free trade agreements and stop these countries bringing their workers from overseas, and that is actually happening. Ensure that we as a nation can afford this. You haven't proven that to me. I'm worried about the future generations and the debt we are going to leave them. You can sit there and promise me all these things, but another thing too is all your deals that you may have been done in this chamber with the other senators, there is no guarantee who's going to be Prime Minister in this country next week, whether it's going to be Malcolm Turnbull. So the whole fact is, and we go to an early election, are these deals going to be secure? Because they possibly won't be. So I want to know the future of this nation is in good hands, and I surely don't feel it is.